What's up, everybody? You're very welcome along to this Anfield Agenda interview special. I'm delighted to say that today's guest was somebody who I've been looking to get onto the show for 18 months now. In my mind, the foremost person out there when it comes to Liverpool FC. Anything you want to know, Paul Tomkins of the Tomkins Times is your man. Today's interview was about Paul's latest book, PERCH, Liverpool FC, the Champions of Everything. The book delves into Liverpool's fantastic season last year that brought to an end 30 years of a title drought. It talks about the backroom staff. It talks about the throwing coach. We go into detail about referees, and Paul really gives you an insight into why he is so well thought of, so highly regarded amongst Liverpool fans. Also, Paul has given us three signed copies of his book to give away. To be able a chance to win that, head over to the Anfield Agenda Twitter account. Have a look at our pin tweet. All the information is over there. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, this is one interview that you do not want to miss. So without further ado, let me take you to the interview. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Tomkins. Mr. Paul Tomkins, welcome along and congratulations on PERCH, the latest book out, Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool FC, Champions of Everything. How did you find writing this one?
Yeah, this one was unique. I think I've lost count. Not one of those facetious things. I've lost count of how many football books I've written. Some of them have been sort of anthologies, but yeah, so 14 or 15 in the last 15 years. This has definitely been the most surreal in that. I've probably done about 6 or 7 season reviews that I've written as the seasons unfolded. And that started in 2004-05. So I landed on my feet with that, and having Istanbul as the final chapter, which is what launched my career. But when you're writing a book and you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And certainly when I was writing that first book, I didn't expect anything. We weren't going to win the league by the time I started writing it. I started writing it in about December 2004. So we weren't going to win the league. I don't think anybody weirdly, I ended up writing an article for Football 365 in early 2005 about how Liverpool were going to win the Champions League and how we'd end up meeting Chelsea in the semi-final, and we beat them for this reason and that reason. And I'm terrible. I don't make predictions. I'm terrible at them. But that one was kind of like, people are like, after we won the Champions League, people were sort of digging that up and saying, my God, this guy's a psychic. Since then, my predictions haven't been very good. But there's just something about, I thought we could beat Chelsea in the way that Chelsea had beaten Arsenal the year before. Anyway, so when you start a book like this and you don't know what's going to happen, but then there was something like 2018-19 when it felt obviously like Liverpool, when I started writing the book for that season, Mentality Monsters, it felt like, Liverpool were in the title race. So there's quite a lot of pressure, and obviously that was a tight situation with City, and then we had the 10-point lead with the game in hand, and I'm thinking, we've got this in the bag, and then we lost. The game in hand was at City, but then we ended up winning the Champions League. So that book, which could have ended up, and it's like with anything, if the season is successful, the book will do better because, it doesn't matter how good the book is. If you've written about something that's successful, there'll be more interest. And I think I've written some good books in seasons when Liverpool won nothing or, just came close to something. But but with this, obviously, it looked like we were running away with the league. And then when the coronavirus struck, it's just like, I've done all this work and, West Ham owners are calling for the season to be null and voided. I'm just
completely unselfishly, of course. There was no ulterior motive there whatsoever.
They are the nicest people in football. And it's good to hear West Ham was speaking out again, about Project. You only told me what it was called a minute ago, but I can't remember.
Project Big Picture.
There were good aspects to the project that I think, but anything. I don't know who gave it the name Project. Anytime Project anything, Project bullshit, annoying. But yeah, so yeah, when West Ham were calling for the league to be annulled, and I just think, and then I'm like, then I'm having to rewrite stuff because to write about the lockdown and then writing about the Atletico Madrid game and all the politics of that, should that game have gone ahead, and then writing about. And then I scrapped a load of stuff that I'd already written and was having to write new stuff. Got about a month of headspace away from it all during the lockdown, and then when it all started up again, it was kind of like, what if we throw this away now? This will be, I'm generally seen as a very positive, optimistic person, but I'm actually quite pessimistic, and so I'm not as devastated if Liverpool don't. I don't expect Liverpool to win every game, and I never have. And I used to have arguments with people that say, "Oh, Liverpool are going to win this one 6-0," and I say, "Well, if that's your starting point, and we don't win 6-0, you're going to be," and then we win 1-0, and they're incredibly angry because we've just won 1-0. So I didn't think we were going to throw away the lead after the restart, but obviously that's that's a nagging doubt that it's not been sewn up yet, and I'd say I'll never take it for granted. So then I was having to write about those games, chapters and all that stuff, and then trying to get the book out as quickly as possible. It's always, the aim is always to be as good as possible and not to rush it, but also to get it out in a timely fashion as well. So this has been definitely the most challenging. I was saying to you off air, it feels like I wrote it a year ago. I've lost all concept of time in 2020. I think it feels like we had the lockdown feels like it was the close season of between 2 seasons ago, and then we had another season. There was so much crammed into that short period of time, and then we had another short break. So it feels like we're on the 3rd season almost of 2020 already. So so my head's still spinning a bit, but no, it's difficult to write a book while I'm trying to do all the other stuff I'm doing in running the Tomkins Times and writing articles and trying not to trying to think about things a bit deeper. But as you know, it's harder to find the time to write thoughtful, time-consuming analysis. People don't really want that so much now. So,
well, my family have a bone to pick with you because last year I was on holiday in Turkey and they didn't see me for a lot of it because I was fully engrossed in Mentality Monsters. And so I've got to pass that on for my wife. She said next year we go on holiday, it's the book and that's it. No, book on the plane, no more reading. I want to get straight into this one because you had me gripped from the very first chapter of this, Paul. Please explain the phrase "best ever European champions" to our viewers.
Yeah, there's a few caveats with that, but that was something that I kind of realised at the start of last season. So last season, 2019-20. So we just won the Champions League, and I was kind of thinking about, but we hadn't won the Premier League, but I was thinking about it was 97 points, wasn't it? And so I was just thinking how many European champions could have got anywhere near 97 points? Because Liverpool played an almost perfect league season. At that stage, winning 30 games in a season, losing one. Was it 1 or 2? 1, I think. Was it? Either way,
it was just the one game to City.
Just the one defeat, 7 draws, 30 wins. But to do that whilst also winning the Champions League. And then I also thought, well, in winning the Champions League, we played some of the best teams in the world. So we'd beaten Barcelona, Bayern, PSG, Napoli. So we'd had to. So it was apart from Porto, it wasn't like it was an easy route to the final either. But just the point was that. So I went through and looked at all the all the English champions and kind of adjusting to 3 points for a win. I mean, it's slightly different now in that teams do win more games now than Bob Paisley's sides. Back then, football was a bit more attritional, I think, and the pitches weren't so good. It was more of a slog, and I think, a lot of that was before 3 points for a win, so draws were relatively better back then. But yeah, going back through history, through England, and then going back through the champions like Real Madrid, Barcelona, the German champions, and I think if you included all European champions, if you extrapolated all the points, then Liverpool would have ranked fifth. I would have ranked fifth for the most league points whilst simultaneously winning the Champions League. So this wasn't about winning the league and then the next year winning the Champions League. This was about having an incredible league season whilst winning the Champions League, whilst playing tough games. But then it worked out, a couple of those champions that ranked above Liverpool, I think they played something like 20 league games in a season. This was, just a really silly low amount. Then you had the German teams that played 34 league games. So if you set it at a minimum of 38 league games, which is the reality that Liverpool faced, then no other club had got as many points, and that was what would rank Liverpool first. So I mean, it is the caveat of getting rid of half of the champions because they didn't play as many games. But in playing a tough league season whilst trying to win the Champions League, I would say that. I mean, you can argue, were the Bayern sides of the 70s, Ajax, all these teams, were they better teams? Maybe they were, but this was just as an achievement. And this was at a time when I thought people were still being a bit sniffy about Klopp's Liverpool. So they didn't play that well, and we didn't score as many goals in the Champions League as the year before. And I don't know, it was the first thing I looked at and thought, this is a metric that historically, along with the fact that it was the third best league points tally in history in England, and I think when you added that to to get 97 points in a season if you didn't play in Europe would be incredible. To get 97 points when you've had to play all those, you've had to play Barcelona home and away, Bayern home and away, PSG, all that. It just seemed like an incredible achievement, and it's what made me think that. And I wrote it on my site, the Tomkins Times originally, and I used it at the start of the book because that was kind of like where I was at the start of the season, thinking that actually, unlike 2013-14, when it all felt a bit out of nothing, I felt that this was a serious building of a team and I didn't get the sense that it was they had peaked with winning the Champions League, and although I didn't expect Liverpool to beat 97 points this past season, but I thought we are a serious side, and I just felt that people were just being a bit sniffy, and the final itself was such a terrible game of football that it was a shame that the Barcelona semi-final, it was kind of like, I watched that game, literally I watched that game again about 10 times. I hadn't watched the final again once. I fast forwarded to Origi's winner, he's the second goal late on. The rest of the game was just a turd. And the Barcelona semi-final was like the Istanbul moment, wasn't it? It was that was the peak of that season. And so that was why I thought, and people can disagree with that. I quite like sort of historical, statistical thing, and you can then argue about the context, the strength of the leagues. You can argue about, and you can never be definitive about these things. But what I did find interesting was that throughout this past season, Liverpool then overtook in the ELO club rankings pretty much all of the sides that I had said Liverpool were better than. So Liverpool ended up ranking 4th in European football history for because the club ELO index is like a rolling score system where it takes into account the quality of your results and the quality of the opposition. And I think just before Liverpool lost at Watford, I think, they'd been on like an 18-month run where we're just beating absolutely everybody. And the score got to within, got quite close to Guardiola's Barcelona, and had overtaken Guardiola's Man City. And so I kind of thought, so that thing that I was looking at last summer was kind of like a precursor for that, to say that this actually could be taken as an all-time great European team. And just the one other reason why I think people were being dismissive was because Liverpool hadn't won the league before winning the Champions League. You see what I mean? So it was kind of like, well, you won the Champions League, but you weren't champions. You've not been champions, so you're not a proper. You can't say that. But obviously, we've just done the same thing, but in a different order, in that we've become European champions and now finally perched again as Premier League champions. So.
And about to go back to back as well. You mentioned the Champions League final against Spurs, and then you went back to the semi-final against Barcelona, and I was absolutely convinced when Trent took that corner that the referee was going to pull it back. That was was the part I couldn't believe. And talking about that referee kind of leads me into where I wanted to go with the next one. It's some research that you've done lately, and I'm happy to get your take on that referee moment actually against Barcelona. But then I know that you've conducted a study, and as fans, often at times we all feel from different clubs that there's one referee or two that just don't like us, that just have it in for us. And sometimes this can be absolutely unproven, but you dug into the details. So just your thoughts on that moment, the Trent free kick, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on the refereeing situation.
Yeah, well, on the Trent
or corner, excuse me.
The corner, I didn't celebrate, I don't think, because I just thought something's wrong here. He's taking it too quickly. Once it was clear, I think whoever it was on co-commentary said it's given or something. Then I was through the roof. But referees. I don't know. I've been looking at referees for about 3 years now, and there's two issues. There's 3 issues here. There's refereeing when it comes to foreign players, and I had a hunch that English referees have a distrust of foreign players. Now, this is not a racial thing. We didn't look in. We did a study on it, but we didn't look into race, because there are black English players like Sterling who are brilliant at winning penalties, and there are white English players like Vardy who are brilliant at winning penalties. But white or all the white, whatever race they were, the foreign players just didn't seem to be ranking very highly on winning penalties. And I was thinking, this is going to be a problem because our attacking players are, we've got 2 Africans and a Brazilian, and surely they should be winning more penalties. So we did a study on that. I got people to help from my site, and we went through all 600 Premier League penalties from 2012 to 2019, and we found that referees are less likely to give penalties to foreign players. Not by as much as we thought, which is always why you need to look into the data, because you can think something and it might be intuitive, but the truth might be counterintuitive. So, and this was all based on minutes played. So, I think it was like almost 60% foreign minutes, and it was 40%. I grouped them into British players, and actually, as long as it's not going to offend your native folk, but I grouped it into British Isles players, so to include Ireland as well, because it's the same sort of football culture, certainly in the last 30, 40 years, and I think that an English referee is not going to necessarily think of an Irishman as a foreigner in the way I think you might think of Sadio Mane as a foreigner. And I think, and it's this whole thing that we do see with Salah. You know, when Salah gets pushed over in the box, or he's gone down, he's waited for the contact, he's gone down a bit easy. But if Vardy or Kane just feel a slight, you know, it's like, oh, they've gone down, but they've got every right to go down there. You know, they're clever, and so you get that bias from the commentators. So there's definitely a bias against foreign players in general, but it's not as big as I thought. Interestingly, when it comes to conceding penalties, referees hardly give penalties against English, specifically England players. So there were England players like Ashley Young, who in the entire time hadn't given away a single penalty, even though I'd seen him should have given away 2 in one match against Liverpool. And a week later, I think it was, hacked down Aguero in the box, got away with that. So there's actually a really big difference in that someone like Virgil van Dijk has given away a load of penalties, and he's absolutely rubbish. Phil Jones, I think Phil Jones has given away 1 penalty in that 7 years. So there seems to be a bigger difference there. Now, being a Liverpool fan, I've also just wondered, where have our penalties been since 2013-14? Because that season was insane. And this is another really weird thing, is that when I looked at Liverpool's teams, if there were more British players in the team, Liverpool would tend to win more penalties. And when the number of foreign players went up, so this is over a 20-year period, when the number of foreign players went up, attacking players, the penalties went down. So, you know, when we have players like Michael Owen, Gerrard, Murphy, we win a ton of penalties. Even in 2013-14, Suarez only won 3 penalties for fouls. And it was Sturridge, Sterling, Joe Allen won a Premier League penalty. John Flanagan won Liverpool Premier League penalty. So it's just these weird things with Liverpool that were going on. And I was thinking, you know, what's happening? Where are Liverpool's penalties going? And again, I looked at things like league averages. So if you're finishing the top 4, you should be averaging around 7 penalties a season. And if you finish in the bottom 3, you average less than 3 penalties a season. That seems quite logical, because if you're a good attacking side, you would expect to get penalties. And if you're a bit of a rubbish team, you would expect to be under a lot of pressure in your own box a lot of the time and concede penalties. What's weird is that Liverpool, over the last 6 years, win penalties at a rate that's much closer to a relegated side than a successful side, even though in that time we've been a successful side. And I looked at things like, for most touches in the opposition box last season, Salah was top, Sterling was second. I think it was then Mane and Firmino. So we had 3 of the 4 players having the most touches in the box, and we just weren't getting the penalties, you know. So things like that. And then I was looking at Anfield and the Kop, and the fact that my view was that there's this mythology around the Kop, that the Kop wins too many penalties. And I had that theory a few years ago, and then every time anyone like Steve Bruce or Neil Warnock or any Sam Allardyce, anytime there was a clear penalty that Liverpool should have had, they would have said afterwards, the Kop's always calling for penalties. That's a load of old nonsense. But we're literally, you know, apart from Michael Oliver, if you took Michael Oliver out of the picture, I think
best referee.
Yeah,
best referee, hands down to me. Sorry for talking over you, but I don't have much of a respect for a lot of Premier League officiating, but I have to say I think Michael Oliver is head and shoulders the best referee we have.
And it's weird that it's in the statistically, as we're going to get onto the villain in a minute, but statistically, Oliver his figures look natural. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. But the Liverpool, so Anfield is a thing, and it wasn't like there weren't penalty decisions. You know, there were 2 or 3 seasons ago, there were people stopping crosses with their arms, you know, punching. You know, Salah was being taken down in the box. Mane was being taken down in the box. Nothing was being given, especially at the Kop end. And so I found that, and all the other teams, most teams get 70% of their penalties at home. And Liverpool were the only club. I think we got something like, over a 5-year period, we got 40% of our penalties at Anfield. And so we were getting an average number of penalties, but we were getting a below average. So it's not like we were getting 20 away from home. Do you know what I mean? The missing penalties were at home. So there was something going on at Anfield in particular. And my view is that whenever there's a supposed bias about something, is that people then try too hard to bend over backwards to hide a bias or to show that they're not biased. So that's kind of been my issue. Then we got on to Martin Atkinson, who I'd forgotten. I think I cover him in the book, but he was the ref, I believe, when Keita was taken down in the box against Leicester in that 1-1 draw 2 seasons ago, when he just absolutely sort of sliced. Guy missed the ball, took him out. The same game that Harry Maguire should have been sent off for a last man foul, but only got a yellow. So with Atkinson, we sort of went into his figures, and he's given Liverpool 1 penalty in the last 24 games. So his average for penalties per game is, he would normally give a penalty every 4 games. And for Liverpool, before Steven Gerrard released the book in 2015, saying how much he hated Martin Atkinson. Apparently, I've not read the book, but he just spent the book, laying into Martin Atkinson. I've read a review of the book where it talks about how much Gerrard hates Martin Atkinson. And since then, that's when Klopp arrived. And since then, we've had him for 23 games, and he's given us 1 penalty. Now, but in fairness to him, he does have another weird anomaly, and that's West Ham. He hasn't given West Ham a penalty for something like 27 games. So, but then in that time, West Ham have been pretty rubbish. So you could argue that it's not a bias, but then you have this situation where Steven Gerrard publicly lambasts Martin Atkinson, and since then, the way Martin Atkinson used to give us a penalty every 9 games has changed, where it's now been 1 in 23 games. So is that a bias? I don't know. The issue is that in those games, in that time, there have been lots of really clear penalty incidents. So it's not like he just happens to have had 23 games where nothing really happened. We can think of a lot of big instances, and this I focused in more on it after the Villa game, because at 1-0 down, although Liverpool ended up thinking the place out, 1-0 down, that was a clear, absolute foul on Mo Salah. If that had been given, 80% chance of a goal with a penalty, and then you've got a different game. So Atkinson is my feeling is that he doesn't like Liverpool, and he's just kind of it's not. It doesn't have to be anything. He's just the benefit of the doubt. He's not going to give Liverpool's way if he doesn't like them. Now, if you look at Michael Oliver, Michael Oliver gives penalties slightly more frequently in general than Martin Atkinson. So he gives a penalty to one team or the other every 3.5 games. But I think he's given Liverpool 10 penalties, and he's given 5 penalties against Liverpool. And that seems like and over the period of time, that seems like a really normal distribution. Whereas with Atkinson, it just doesn't seem normal and natural.
He's always at the scene of the crime, Atkinson, isn't he? Even if we go back to the 1-1 draw at Old Trafford last season, blatant foul on the halfway line to lead up to United's goal. And somehow, again, even with VAR, Martin Atkinson's there. And as you said, the Villa game, that could have gone either way, and Villa deserve full credit for the victory, but at 1-0 down, blatant penalty, even with VAR, nothing. And it can't be, it can't be, I don't believe in coincidences, Paul, and as somebody who deals in statistics, I'm sure you don't really either.
I mean, you occasionally get some really weird coincidences, but generally, obviously, if there's a pattern, there's a pattern. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, last year as well, Atkinson was the one that on VAR at Villa Park as well, when we first got to the armpit rule, when he spent about 5 minutes on Firmino's armpit and finally decided, yeah, he's offside, and the lines were redrawn time and time again. So he's just somebody that I just don't think he likes Liverpool, and I don't know why there wasn't John Moss, who's also pretty incompetent, I think. I don't know.
I have a phrase for John Moss. Sorry, I say he's the referee that referees the middle third of the pitch better than anybody else, because it's the only area of the pitch he's ever in.
He's not the fittest. He's my age, and he's not the fittest of men. And yeah, he's kind of weird in that he gave more cop end penalties than anyone else over a certain period of time, over like 2 seasons, and those penalties were both to Spurs. And so I don't think there's an agenda with any other referees. I think they have the Anfield, the cop bias. I think they have that in their heads. But when you look at Michael Oliver, he gives Liverpool. Sorry, I'm getting alarms here. He gives Liverpool decisions, and he gives decisions against Liverpool, and they generally, you obviously like it when your team gets the decision, but they generally seem to make sense. And he's the only referee that's given Liverpool, I think he's given Liverpool most of the Anfield penalties in the last few years. And that's not very many at all either, because, it's still not a lot. But so yeah, referees, they have their biases. I just think that there's a series of problems working against Liverpool, i.e. we've got foreign attacking players that are quick, but when they get fouled and go down, there's some distrust from the English referees that, they can do some cognitive dissonance to make sure that when it's a different player, that's a foul. But when they do it, they're looking for it. So you've got that. I think you've got the fact that the cop traditionally used to win, lots of penalties. So that referees think. And then you've got some referees, and Martin Atkinson seems to do Liverpool games more than anyone else. Mike Dean is also a really good penalty giver. He's the most frequent penalty giver, but he doesn't really do our games unless we play Everton, I think. So yeah, I worry that because I end up, the only time I take to Twitter these days is normally to moan about referees. And I don't ever want to think it's like a conspiracy or anything like that. It's not about conspiracies. It's about biases and just how how referees process information, and how people can think that some players are looking for the foul and that be a problem, and other players are looking for the foul and that's clever. And if it's Harry Kane or Raheem Sterling, it's clever, it's good play, it's what you need to do. So I think there are issues like that. So but no conspiracy. So I don't want to come off as a all refs hate Liverpool. I don't think that. I think that most Premier League refs are crap. I think 2 or 3 of them are decent, and I think Michael Oliver is excellent. And on the Tomkins Times, when people found out that Michael Oliver was the referee at the weekend, people were saying that's better than the team news. You know what I mean? Because you just feel like he's not going to be biased for you, but he's not going to be he's not going to be Martin Atkinson. So.
Briefly, this is another brief one. Explain the phrase, and people will understand this when they read the book, cheapest champions.
Yeah. Oh, God. When did this start? It started under Benitez when I was writing for the official Liverpool site, and people kept saying, like, Liverpool should be champions. There's no excuses. Liverpool should be champions. So I was kind of trying to work out ways of comparing what Manchester United had paid and what Liverpool paid, and it was clear that United had spent a lot more money. One of the problems was that United spent a lot of that money. Rio Ferdinand for a record fee at the time, Wayne Rooney for a record fee. A lot of these things, or near record fee on Rooney, a lot of these things happened before Benitez arrived. So if you looked at net spend, you weren't looking at what United already had spent on. So I was kind of working out ways to do that and to compare across other eras. And then a guy, an accountant and a statistician, Graham Riley, got a senior accountant, very clever guy, got in touch and said, why don't we create a method of football inflation. Now, I was comparing transfers as a percentage. So I would say that Fernando Torres cost 70% of the record fee at the time. So, but Graham said, like, let's look at working out an index. So we spent about 6 months going through all the Premier League transfers each season, and we got a list of how much all the players cost. So in the first Premier League season, obviously, I hate stats that just deal with the Premier League, but this was a project that, we could go back to 1880 and we'd never get it done. So we started with the Premier League. Also, the main focus was on how football had changed post Abramovich at Chelsea. So, we got all the players for 1992, 93. So the index was 1. And then when there was inflation the next year, the index might have gone up to 2. So the average price of a Premier League player was twice what it was before. And then it got to the point a few years later where it was 11. So the average price was 11 times. So what we also did with that meant that we could convert every transfer to its current day transfer price. So last season we would have had 2019 money, and then you could work out, well, actually Virgil van Dijk was still around 75 million because there hadn't been much change in the inflation. But someone like Mangala at Man City cost something like 104 million with inflation. And actually Carvalho at Chelsea, who cost about 20 to 30 million, 16, 17 years earlier, he was, I can't remember what it was, but 130, 150 million. So actually Van Dijk, adjusted for inflation, Van Dijk ranked as the 11th most expensive defender in the Premier League era. And then you also have players like Phil Babb and John Scales, who were expensive at the time, and so they kind of were quite high up as well. With the inflation, we could find out the average cost of a team. So worked out the average price of each team over the 38 games. And when it was about 5 years ago, I noticed that since Arsenal won the league in 2004, and then Chelsea came along, there was something that I called the title zone, where everybody could win the league for the first, what would it have been, 13 seasons. The average cost of the team was around here. And then once Abramovich came along, it kind of went up to here. So it kind of pretty much doubled. And then for the next 15, 16 years, apart from Leicester, everyone was in that higher level. So it was either Man City, Man United or Chelsea that won the league. And their spending was in this, what I call the title zone. And Liverpool's was still, the cost of the team was still about halfway between. Now, obviously, the cheapest champion is Leicester, who were kind of, do you know what I mean? They're down there somewhere. I mean, that was ridiculous. And, that's why they were 5,000 to 1. It's kind of a ludicrous outside phenomenon, outside chance. But apart from Leicester, Liverpool are the first team outside of that title zone to win the league since Arsenal in 2003 and 2004, which is when Abramovich changed football and when obviously 2008 was when Sheikh Mansour came into City. And so, yeah, it's more that and Liverpool's cost of Liverpool's team had been rising slowly. And this is why kind of net spend can be a bad argument as well, because Liverpool's net spend was low due to selling Coutinho. And that's obviously a big blow. That you're losing a great player. But into the team came two players who, when you adjust it for inflation, when you took Coutinho out, who was actually cheap when he played for Liverpool, meant that Liverpool now had a costlier team. So it felt to me that Liverpool were building towards having a more expensive team. And obviously the wage bill is another issue, because Liverpool were doing pretty well on fees and were agreeing sensible basic wages. And Liverpool's wage bill would only spike if they did stupid things like winning the Champions League and winning the Premier League, which is what they went and did. Then coronavirus struck, and now, you know, we've got a high wage bill and with less income, you know. So that's another issue. But so yeah, so it wasn't. People would say, look at Van Dijk and Alisson and say, yeah, it's just like Man City. It was you bought the title. But actually, the overall cost of the team, adjusted for inflation, it was a kind of like a mid-ranking team when it comes to all the champions over the years. And it's certainly in the last 15, 16 years, only Leicester have been cheaper. And I discount Leicester from everything just because I live in Leicester these days, and it makes no sense. So, you know, so yeah, so I think, you know, it's just a sign of how much value Klopp got out of the side. And as I say, it doesn't get into net spend, gross spend arguments, which you can twist depending on which year you want to cut it off at. You know what I mean? So last year, Liverpool won the league with adding no players at all. And my argument for why that was a good idea is actually something completely different that's in the book. And that's about the Flynn effect, which is the social multiplier effect, which is the idea that of having a team together and learning from each other through intense training. So the training has got to be world class. The training has got to push the players, and the players have got to want to do it. And so the reason so many players went from being very good, very, very good players at Liverpool to being world class was, I believe, the whole training with Klopp and with Pep Linders. But just and I first realised this when I was reading about Dortmund, and how I think Marco Reus might have been the one that said that training was often harder than the matches. And I was kind of thinking, so the training would only be like, they'd have a 20-minute game, so they wouldn't be killing each other and knackering themselves out, but they would have a 20-minute game where it was harder to get the ball, you know, because they were pressing each other so much in this training match, that actually the games themselves start to seem easy. And I was thinking, if you train like that during the week, it's going to improve the players based on the Flynn effect, the social multiplier effect, which is you don't just learn by watching, you learn by participating. Do you know what I mean? So it's two things. So you're learning from seeing better players do good things on the training ground. So if you see Bobby Firmino do something on the training ground, you can learn from him. But actually, you'll learn more from the fact that you will have to play in these training matches that test you beyond your limits, and you will have these training drills that test you beyond these limits. And Linders would come up with these crazy situations, you know, just where a team would have a limited number of seconds to score a goal, and it would be 5 versus 3 or 8 versus 2 or something, you know, and it just create these spontaneous situations where the players had to think really quickly, and then that translates into the team, and then all that learned, that kind of shared knowledge is what made me think last year Liverpool could be successful. Actually, sometimes you can be better by adding no one than you can be by adding 6 players. Because if you add 6 players, you've lost all that. You've got to create the camaraderie to start with. You've got to teach them how to press, when to press. You've got to teach them to trust each other. You know, there's so many things, and I think that whilst you still need to refresh, another thing that I found in the data is that actually when teams spend money, it's normally the season after that they see some real league improvement. So if a team spent 200 million adjusted for inflation, it would be the season after they spent that money that they would improve. And my conclusion would be that that's because they've had time to gel as a team and to learn the ideas. And you can see it with individuals like Fabinho, Oxlade-Chamberlain, Andy Robertson, hopefully now with Minamino. But, you know, players have come in and looked pretty average for 6 months. And they've been out of the team and sometimes out of the squad. But all that time they are learning and this was also the old Liverpool way, was you would do your time in the reserves, you would learn in training, and you know, under Shankly, Paisley, Fagan, there was this thing of the Liverpool way. The Liverpool way was probably what was learned in training, and they probably had a similar, without the kind of psychological science that you have now to explain why. But what they were doing was creating these sort of what were at the time elite training conditions, and the players were taking a while to get up to the Liverpool way. You know, it took them time to adjust, which is why players like Ronnie Whelan came over and would spend 2 years in the reserves. You know, so there's kind of various issues from the book there, but I think it's about spending money, but Klopp has proved that you don't have to spend more. And Edwards, you know, you've got to give Michael Edwards credit as well. I also feel that Michael Edwards' scouting has been outstanding, but it has to have someone like Klopp to believe in it and to work with him. Otherwise, because you saw, like, you know, so Edwards and whoever was scouting identified Roberto Firmino. Brendan Rodgers didn't want Firmino. He didn't know what to do with Firmino, Firmino. So it's no good having a great sort of scouting system if the manager doesn't want those players. Klopp obviously then saw Firmino and said, I know you from Germany, you're brilliant. I'm going to play you in this way. And within a few months, Firmino was looking outstanding. So I think there are so many keys to the success of the last 2 years in particular. But I think that the recruitment has been so good, but that it's been in tandem with what Klopp wants. And Klopp actually wants Michael Edwards to do Michael Edwards' job. Do you know what I mean? Whereas you felt with Brendan Rodgers, he would rather Michael Edwards didn't exist and that Rodgers was left to do everything himself. So it's kind of been a perfect storm of, in a good way, of, you know, spotting the right players, but then having the right training and then having the right manager who can rise above all the situations. You know, we lost 7-2 in the last game and it was absurd. And I saw a picture of Klopp's smiling face today saying that he sent the players a very, very long text message after the Villa game. And I just saw that and I was like, right, yeah, okay. It just felt like we're ready to go again, if that makes sense. And I think Klopp's personality is such that I don't think there are many people in world football that are like that, and hence that they're all the things that had to come together for Liverpool to just be one of the best teams in history. So
you've touched on the support staff there a little bit, and there's 2 chapters here, so I'm going to throw them both to you because I know we're pushed on time, and we'll see what we can get in the last few minutes. But this is my favorite chapter in the book, and I'm not going to lie to the viewers. I've practiced trying to say the name of this chapter out because it's quite a mouthful when you get it. So here we go. Sergeant Pepin's Jurgen Klopp Club Bond. It talks about the support staff and the fantastic structure that we have at the club. Please take us through that, Paul.
Yeah, that kind of chapter. The chapter title came to me. The Sergeant Pepper's. You get various puns in there, and then I started thinking about. When you think about something like Sergeant Pepper's, and people talk about the Beatles and how McCartney and Lennon were the geniuses, and then I just started thinking about that album and looking at how many other people were involved and all the engineers, the rest, the other 2 Beatles for a start, and then you just go down the list, and there were so many people that contributed, and that kind of seemed like a good parallel for what's going on at Liverpool. In that, I just think, and it's not just, as I say, there's another chapter about Thomas Gronemark. That's how you pronounce it. It's all about the attention to detail stuff. Is the backroom staff, and you've got the, as we were talking about, you've got Michael Edwards, and Michael Edwards is an ex-footballer who wasn't overly keen on stats, but was started off with doing video analysis, and he was quite sceptical about stats, and it was only later, it was only through sort of working with Ian Graham that he actually started to see that they could develop some interesting stats. Not, because there was an incident at Portsmouth where players started, everybody wanted to take the kickoff because they wanted to get another successful pass on their data. You know what I mean? So, and he just thought, this is absolute bullshit. It's like, this has got nothing to do with winning the game of football. The players became obsessed with getting 95% passing stats, and he just thought that was nonsense. So, working with Ian Graham and the models that Ian Graham was developing were far more advanced and analytical. And so you've got this, and then you've got the 4 or 5 PhDs in physics that work at the club. All of those, all of those are no good if they can't feed that information into Ian Graham. And if Ian Graham can't, I mean, Michael Edwards is a very clever numbers guy, but he's not a maths PhD or a physics PhD. He's a football guy.
There is a really lovely story, on Michael Edwards that you touch on in the book, actually, with Harry Redknapp, that just kind of lets you know that even in this really busy period, a hectic club with all the work that they're going through, it just lets you show the character of personality that Liverpool have working at the club right now. And in Michael Edwards there in particular, that's a wonderful story. I wonder, could you briefly touch on it maybe for the viewers?
Yeah, it was. If I can remember it, I mean, it was just that he took Edwards took some time out of a busy schedule to help Redknapp with I can't remember what the problem was, but there was an issue. There was
a man that was had very limited time to live, and Harry Redknapp had rang Michael Edwards to ask him could he bring him up. He's a massive Liverpool fan.
Right. So yeah. So I mean, that's my memory for you. To remember what's in my own book. But yeah, he. I think there's a lot of people at Liverpool that are like that, and I've heard stories of Klopp, and that people will take the time out of the day to look to help other people, even though they're incredibly busy people and they're very very focused. I think that's something else. I think that another, maybe under a different manager, Michael Edwards would be encouraged to be a different way, even though maybe that wouldn't be his character. But under Klopp, it's very non-egotistical. It's very collaborative. It's very united. And Klopp's got such a small ego, which is so unusual. And I think because he's such a big man, he's got such a small ego, but he's also got such a massive aura and presence that comes from his body of work. So he's not just a big guy. He's a big guy who's clever, and he's a big guy who's clever and who did miracles at Dortmund and who did miracles at Mainz, particularly at Dortmund. And then he's come to Liverpool, and then he's worked miracles again. And I think when you've got somebody like that who is then going to people like Michael Edwards, and I think the way it will work is more that, as I say, that the data guys will feed into Ian Graham. Ian Graham will feed in more to Michael Edwards, and then Michael Edwards will speak to Klopp. And you've got Michael Edwards, who was an ex-player, not a successful player, but was, and you're saying about Redknapp came up through Redknapp. It's quite surprising to think that Redknapp gave him his first chance. In that we think of Harry Redknapp as kind of like a bit of a dinosaur, and what he was doing, what Edwards was doing then was quite different. It was video analysis, but the point is that Klopp is eager to bring all these people in to help him. Klopp doesn't say, "I know best. I don't need you telling me what to do." He'll actually say, "Actually, I need you telling me what I should do, or I need your opinion, and we can talk about. We're not necessarily going to do what you say, but explain things to me." And that's where you get the throwing coach and how Liverpool went from, I think it's like the third worst possession retention from throw-ins in either in the Premier League or in the whole of Europe's main leagues.
We did have the two dinosaurs over in Doha that were mocking the throwing coach, and that I don't know. I know you touched on them in the book as well, but I mean, look, I'm not a professional, but I do understand that it's the slightest margins at the very top level. And if you can find out 0.5% or that 1%, then you should be looking into any way of doing it. So how that could be ridiculed, I just don't get.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I can remember is Andy Gray's quotes is like, I'll be a kickoff coach then. Give me the ball, I'll just kick it. And he's like, right, hang on a minute. So first of all, you think about throwing coach and you think about Joe Gomez and his long throw, which obviously they worked on initially. But which Gomez only used a couple of times because he wasn't really playing fullback for Liverpool. But then he used it for England, and he threw it almost to the other side of the pitch, and England scored a goal. I mean, he threw it right to the far side of the box. But what Klopp had in mind was just keeping possession. It wasn't about even gains on attacking throws. It was just keeping possession. And then I went through using stats, using Y-Scout. I went through all of the goals last season from the first touch to the last. And it didn't make it into the book in the end, but I was going to do like a DNA sort of sequence of Liverpool's goals and how, who was involved. So I started noticing that actually a Van Dijk pass was one of the key things. If you went back in the move, there was a searching Van Dijk pass almost always earlier in the move. The ball might switch from one flank to another. The amount of times that we scored a goal after both Robertson and Alexander-Arnold had touched the ball in the same move just seemed really incredible to me. And so I started identifying all these characteristics of how we scored a goal. Another one would be a touch from Alisson or even Adrian. But then I looked at throw-ins, and if you actually went back and you started analysing the throw-ins, and you could see the amount of times Firmino would drop from his forward position, he would drop even all the way back, almost to the left, to the fullback position, to create space. He'd get the throw, and you could see that Andy Robertson and Alexander-Arnold were now able to throw the ball 10 yards further infield. So as all the players came you've got 7 or 8 opposition players coming towards the thrower to block to mark, and then Firmino could drop into the space behind. Robertson and Alexander-Arnold could find him, and then suddenly we were on the attack. And then not only have you kept possession, you've taken 7 players out of the game with a throw-in. And it's not a throw-in into the box, it's a throw-in into the middle of quite a lot of the throw-ins were into the centre circle from the touchline. So just something like that, and then to go to then have the most successful possession retention stats from throw-ins, to go from like the worst to the best is incredible. And it's not just, we're talking about possession with possession stats, and you have the midfielders who have 95% possession and all they do is knock the ball back to the goalkeeper. It's not really adding anything. But what was being added with the possession was that it could quickly change that possession into an attacking chance. And so that was part of, and so you can't just say, this is another thing that annoyed me last season, and Steve Nicol said it. I think there was a throw-in at I want to call it Middlesbrough, Wolves, I think, away. And I think that's the one where there was some kind of move where Henderson, and I wrote about it in the book, about Henderson, it was the 84th minute or something, and Henderson ran 60 yards like a lunatic up the right wing to close down a player, and he ended up winning a throw-in. And it just felt to me that winning that throw, and the score was 1-1 at the time, I think, and winning that throw was kind of so symbolic of, you know, you just think, well, why has he just run 60 yards to win a throw? But it's an emblem of, it's a symbol of the effort that I'm going to put in. And it's also because a throw-in, even if we only get a throw-in out of it, a throw-in is now a handy situation. And so they threw the ball. I think Firmino ducked under it. Salah tried to jink, beat a couple of players. The ball bounced back and we scored a goal. And I think it was Steve Nicol that said something like, oh, teams score goals from throw-ins anyway. You don't have to practice them. And I was kind of like, at this stage, I think I could count, there was almost, throughout the season, about 15 goals that came from clever throws or throws that were into space that you could see that the team had worked on. So if we'd only got 10 goals just by randomly throwing the ball down the line like everybody else does, what were those 5 goals worth? And one of those goals was at Wolves where we got the late winner. And so it just seemed to be this really easy thing to say, well, what are you doing? It's nothing. It's meaningless. It's, you know, but actually, if you look at the data, and if you actually look at the goals themselves from the start of the moves, you can see all these things that Liverpool were working on. One other thing that I noticed that I assumed was possibly part of the plan, but when we hit the long diagonals out to the fullbacks, or out to Salah and Mane.
I do love a Verge diag, but I have to say I do love them.
Because another thing is we've got these quarterbacks. You know, we've got 2 quarterbacks in the same defence in Alexander-Arnold and Van Dijk. Do you know what I mean? They hit passes as well as you know, they're up there with De Bruyne, and they're in our defence. Alisson, Henderson can hit a great long pass, but when you hit those long balls out to the spaces, to the wings, if the opposition does get a touch, what I saw was happening a lot was that all they could do was head the ball out for a throw-in. And suddenly we've gone from having Van Dijk with the ball or Trent Alexander having the ball, and it's one 50, 60-yard pass, and it's not a hit and hope because they're skillful players, and it's a ball that they're trying to get the Liverpool player in behind. But if they can't get the player in behind, there's a good chance. I kept seeing it. I kept seeing these players that were just stretching and then head the ball out, and then we'd take the throw in. And literally within 1 second, one pass, we're down on their byline, cutting the ball back, and we scored. And so it's just interesting how all these things fit together. And you can just say that a throwing coach is something completely separate, but actually the way Klopp read about him and thought, I need this guy's knowledge. And Klopp doesn't think, I'm a manager, I know more about throw-ins than any throwing coach could ever know. No, he thinks, as you say, marginal gains. He thinks, I can learn something from this guy. And it's that humility from Klopp. I mean, Klopp's got an ego, but he doesn't let the ego run the show. Do you know what I mean? And that's why I think you've got brilliant people like Linders, who to me seems to be being kind of groomed as the natural successor to Klopp. I think he's got the talent, and I think he's got most of the personality. But what Klopp has got is that enormous personality, and what Klopp has also got is that record of having done it everywhere he's been. Do you know what I mean? So, but Linders, I saw Zeljko Buvac talking about he was the brains behind it all, very modestly, wasn't he? Saying this.
I've seen this recently. Yeah, I've seen his comment.
And I just thought, well, hang on, mate. You did a great job at Dortmund, but Liverpool only went into overdrive once you left. And once Linders was brought back from Holland, then the game evolved to a more passing game. Do you know what I mean? Possession was a bit more. It was a bit less counter pressing, and it was a bit more possession. And I think that Dutch, the next generation, like Linders is what, mid-30s, late 30s? He's only mid-30s. He's the next generation from Klopp. Klopp is mid-50s. And if you think that Ferguson stayed at the top for 20, 30 years by having fresh ideas from the coaches. And I think that another reason that Liverpool was so successful was that, like Ferguson, they had Klopp's body of work, Klopp's authority. Do you know what I mean? Like, nobody questions Klopp. You can question Klopp, but you don't question him, if you know what I mean. You can ask him questions, you can debate things with him, but you know that he knows his stuff, and you know that he's won everything everywhere. And that's a bit like Ferguson. And Ferguson, later on, it was more about the coaches and the assistant managers and the way he freshened things up and changed tactics due to things like when Steve McLaren came in '99, he was an early adopter of Prozone. So they had that advantage. So Steve McLaren, like Sam Allardyce early on, was not a dinosaur. He was a pioneer. But as happens with a lot of pioneers, they become dinosaurs because they stay with that.
Revert back.
Yeah, they just stay in that. That worked for me. So, whereas Klopp and what Ferguson managed to do was to almost bring in the next pioneer, if you know what I mean. And I think that Linders is a big part of that, but Klopp is also a big part of that as well, because I think if Linders had come in to be manager without any success, he wouldn't have that respect. And I think that's the kind of thing that Ferguson always had. And all successful managers have that. Is that when you have that recent body of success, you have got the players on your side. What happens is that as that success starts to diminish, I think the players start to trust the manager less. And I think that's what has happened with Jose Mourinho. And so I think you have that aura of invincibility and that you're at the top. And I think the players, that feeds the players. And I think that over time, if you don't keep evolving, over time, people will come along and overtake you. And so I think that's why I think that Linders in particular was so important, was because I think it was a fresh series of ideas that Klopp could tap into, but also because Linders had already been at the club in a lower coaching capacity, Klopp already knew that. And another thing I talk about a lot with Klopp is the dickhead test. Klopp, from his time I think even in Mainz, he asked a player in training, asked a player, he was interviewing a player that was going to join their club. And he said to him, like, are you one of those guys, are you happy if you don't train too well, but you score 2 goals on the weekend? And if the player said, yeah, that's, I'll do the business on the week. I always do the business at the weekend. Klopp's not interested. And that's partly what I go back to earlier with the social multiplier effect, is that if you're not training hard, you're not improving anyone else around you. And so to do that, you can't be a dickhead. You can't be a guy that turns up late to training all the time, or a guy who strolls around in training. You've got to train like James Milner and Henderson train. And that's why they set the tone under Klopp. And I think that the same thing with Linders. They knew that Linders coming in was already an accepted part of that tight-knit group. And they knew that Linders wasn't a dickhead, and he's a really interesting, engaging guy in his own way. And so I just think that all these things came, and hopefully they're all explained in the book, in a much better way than I can do here. But that there were so many things. Some of it was good, was happenstance, and you know, the fact that Buvac decided, you know, whatever happened there, he went, and so there's some serendipity there in that it worked out better for Liverpool to actually bring in Linders and have those fresh ideas. It was serendipity that Klopp was reading that article that talked about the throwing coach in Denmark and got onto him ahead before anyone else got onto him. You know what I mean? So there's all these little things. And the thing like with Van Dijk, you know, the fact that Van Dijk waited 6 months or 5 months, the fact that the club didn't then, at the time I was getting pelters on Twitter for saying that Liverpool were right to wait for Van Dijk. Everyone else was saying, no, we should have gone to the 30 million choice or the next choice or whatever. And I thought, no, this guy is so good and so special, and Klopp has already met him and knows what a leader he is. But Man City could have come along when that deal fell down. Man City could have come along and said, right, we're going to spend 70 million and bring him in. Excuse me. And Man City opted against. They actively decided not to pursue Van Dijk. They liked him. They wanted him, and they could have got him, but they didn't. They didn't, you know, press. They didn't push for it. Maybe they wanted to spend the money elsewhere, buy another £50 million right back or whatever. But that for me was kind of interesting. It's another bit of timing of everything just falling into place, and even how Coutinho leaving meant we could change the system slightly, and it gave us £142 million to spend on 2 players to solve 2 problem areas of the team. I think Klopp would have liked to have kept Coutinho, but then by his leaving, it actually solved more problems, if that makes sense. So it's been a series of things for a few years that have just kind of coincided, and I think, you know, now we're at the point where I think the team is at a really good age. I think the team is at a really good level of experience together. But there may be the whole COVID thing, the whole pre-season, like having a proper Klopp pre-season was always a big thing as well. And we haven't had a chance to have that. So this season, it could unravel a bit because there are more variables. You know, you've got someone like Thiago who could take us to a next level, but there might be games where he gets overrun, or, you know, if Mane had started, I mean, if you think that Jota, I mean, looks a brilliant player, scored 2 superb goals for Portugal the other night, and has done really well for Liverpool in the brief time. But if that had been Mane playing at Aston Villa, Mane would have known every position to be at the right time, whereas Jota doesn't yet know that. And you saw that with the mix-up with Salah, you know, in the Arsenal game. You know, Jota's still finding his way. But when you've got players that have been in the team for years and know their jobs so well, that can give you more of an advantage than buying a really special new player. So we're at an interesting stage where we've got to start revamping the side a bit, because the strikers have probably got another 2 years at the top left in them. Got to start thinking ahead. We've got somebody like Thiago who is just a sensational player. But now we've got to try and make the team work. One of the incredible things with Thiago was, though, that when he did come on against Chelsea, it was against 10 men. But when he did come on, he had that freakish thing that you sometimes get. And you got it with Salah when he joined, and you got it with Fernando Torres when Fernando Torres and Steven Gerrard. You know, it's not telepathy, but it's just that common understanding of, I can instantly know what kind of run you want, and you know what kind of run I'm going to make. And so Thiago hopefully will be one of those players that just come in and doesn't need that time to settle, like Fabinho needed and Oxlade-Chamberlain needed and other players needed. Hopefully Thiago will prove, you know, obviously he's going to have to play against 11 men and not 10 men, but you know, so I was optimistic about the season, but obviously the result of the Villa game is kind of like, you know, it's like I'm still trying to make sense of that, and you know,
Yeah, I suffered rather badly with that Villa game myself there publicly.
And especially as I think you went public on the Man, I was obviously laughing at the Man United result privately. I think I did send a couple of tweets about it, and it wasn't. I wasn't too snarky actually, because I thought that it was ludicrous that one player should be sent off and not Lamela. I thought that United were hard done by there.
Does that go into what we spoke about earlier on? I wonder. Does that go into the referee's preconceived? It's a foreign player going down, and Mourinho does have a reputation for trying to get his team to practice the art of shithousery. And if that was an English player, I genuinely just wonder if that was an English player that went down, would we have had the same narrative?
I think, yeah. The interesting thing was that it was Lamela actually put the elbow into Martial's face first, didn't he? And then Martial just kind of slapped him back. And what Lamela did was old school foreign shithousery. That was Luis Suarez. That was what, you know what I mean? We had players that dived. Franny Lee in the 60s and 70s used to dive. Diving's been going on, but they call them the dark arts of the games perhaps are sometimes more prevalent in Latin America and places like that. But yeah, that's whether you judge those, whether referees are thinking a lot of the time, well, Salah, Firmino, Mane, you're foreign, you're looking to go down. Whereas I actually think with Mane and Salah, they spend more time trying to stay on their feet. And, when they do go down, they get nothing for it anyway. So it's a bizarre situation. But
yeah, it's a really last question before I let you go. And look,
okay.
You can take 1 or 2 points from this. Klopp's history, boys. Now, there's been a seemingly never-ending array of records shattered by this fantastic group of players and this manager. Any ones that stand out for you that you'd like to talk about?
I think the 110 rolling 110 points. I mean, I've already talked about the 97 points whilst winning the Champions League. But yeah, the 110 running points from I think 102 was the previous. 102 was the previous record, which I think Chelsea and Man City held. So a running total of 102 points on a 38 game rolling basis, and then that went up. Liverpool got that to 104, 106, 108, 110. So 36 wins and 2 draws from a run of 38 league games. It's just. That was nearly the perfect league season, even though. And the reason I thought it was kind of appropriate is because the games at the end of the previous season weren't like pressureless games. That was when we won the final 9 games of that season, and we still lost the league. But we were having to try and win all those games, and then to do that and take that into the next season. I think that's the thing that stands out. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's always difficult to say. People said the 100 points won't be beaten, and I think if there hadn't been lockdown this year, I think we could have beaten the 100 points. And I think also we could have beaten the 100 points if Klopp had decided to put out a full strength team every game, but he was trying to use it. One of the things I noticed was that Guardiola. On their 100-point season, didn't use the end of that season after they won the league to really blood any talent. So what Klopp has done by giving Elliott some minutes and Williams 5 starts and other players is that he took the time to build rather than go for the record. He took the time to build. So
pleasure to have you on, Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, PERCH is available everywhere. There's got to be links in the description. Make sure to check out Tomkins Times. Paul, I really appreciate you giving up your time, mate, and we'll catch up soon. And there's a few books that we're going to be giving away as well, and we'll talk about that on social media. Thank you so much, mate. I really appreciate your time.
No worries, Craig, and it's nice to, as I say, we need to stick together, us bald guys, us unfortunate looking bald guys.
So at least you've got talent, Paul. At least you've got talent on your side. But
you've got a platform, mate. You're building your way up big time. So excellent.
Thank you, Paul, and I wish you all the best.
Cheers. Thanks, Craig. Nice one, mate.
Thanks. Bye-bye.